Let me just take a minute to introduce myself. My name is Carla Brown, and I'm the President and CEO of the National Peace Corps Association. We're excited that to have everyone attending. Thanks so much for joining us for a special event with our university partner, the Josef Korbel School of Global and Public Affairs, University of Denver, where our friend and former Peace Corps director, Carol Spahn, who now serves as the Rice Family Professor of Practice of International and Public Affairs, is working. Our conversation with Carol tonight will be led by NPCA, the National Peace Corps Association Board Director, Helen Petrozzola, followed by a question and answer with Stephanie Worden, the Assistant Dean of Enrollment, Marketing, and Communications at the Korbel School, who will answer your questions about the many opportunities they offer for our PCVs, Returned Peace Corps volunteers, seeking a best-in-class graduate education. And with that, I'll turn it over to Helen.
Thank you so much, Carla. I'd actually like to invite Steph to introduce herself.
Thank you so much, Helen. And thanks to all of you. I'm scrolling through and seeing where you're calling in from so many different places. And I want to just start by acknowledging this wonderful group I get the privilege to talk to today. I've so much reverence for the work you are currently doing if you're in service, or the work that you've done before, the courage it took to do that. I'm really here to represent the University of Denver and explain a little bit about the Josef Korbel School of Global and Public Affairs, and particularly for any of those looking to expand their leadership experience. We are ranked 12th in the world for international affairs. And just as important of our ranking is 97% of our students gain employment after graduation. So if any of you are returning volunteers that are looking to thinking about what's next for you, whether that's graduate school or expanding your leadership capacity, Korbel might be a really good place for you, particularly being in Denver, a strategic advantage if you're considering other schools, as you have direct access to not only the great outdoors and an engaging high quality of life, but career opportunities that you might not otherwise get in say, New York or DC. As you're not competing with the graduates for the same opportunities. We offer a hands-on relationship-based experience, which mimics your volunteer service. And so our students work locally, regionally, federally, and of course, internationally. And that direct hands-on experience is directly related to why we're all here today, to hear from former director of the Corps, Carol Spahn, who teaches here. And like other faculty, Carol's here in Denver, mentoring, advising, working with students one-on-one. She doesn't just teach a class and leave. She's embedded here. And that is something that our graduate students note as a transformative and defining experience of their graduate education. So I want to thank Director Spahn for teaching and engaging with our students, staying here, learning here, being here. And if anybody is considering graduate school after their service, I'll stay for the Q&A. And I'll also say, I was flipping. Some of you are from Denver. If you're here in Denver, Korbel hosts open and public events for you that you are welcome to join, including a lecture series that former Director Spahn participated in called Leadership in Turbulent Times. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your service. I'll see you in the Q&A, and I'm going to pass it over to Helen. Thank you.
Thank you, Steph. How exciting. I was excited to learn all these fun details about the Korbel School. So thank you for that. And to you and to Carla, thank you so much for setting us up beautifully for what I think will be a very meaningful conversation this evening. Good evening, everyone. Once again, I am Helen Petrozzola, a returned Peace Corps volunteer from Ukraine and a board director with the National Peace Corps Association. Before we get started, just a quick note, this conversation is being recorded and will be available afterward on NPCA's and the Korbel School's websites. We'll also have time for Q&A, as Steph mentioned, so please feel free to submit your questions at any point using the Q&A function in Zoom. And so if you're looking for it down at the bottom, there's the menu, and you'll see more with 3 dots. If you click that, a mini menu will pop up and you'll see Q&A. So we're inviting you to put your questions in that Q&A space, and we'll go to them just after the conversation with Carol. All right. This conversation is framed around the idea of service as our North Star. And I've been thinking about that phrase because a North Star doesn't tell you exactly where to go, but it does give you direction. It helps you orient yourself, especially in moments of uncertainty or change. And this certainly feels like one of those moments. We're living through a time, as you know, when how we engage with the world is shifting geopolitically, economically, even technologically. The pathways into global work and service are evolving. And in that context, it feels especially meaningful that the United Nations has declared 2026 the International Year of Volunteers, recognizing the vital role that service and those who choose it play in addressing global challenges and strengthening communities. But because even as so much is changing, the core idea of service, of showing up in communities, building relationships, and learning from one another remains steady. For many of us, Peace Corps was that starting point and something that continues to shape how we lead and engage long after service ends. So tonight is really an opportunity to explore, what does it mean for service to be a North Star today? How is that idea evolving? And what does it ask of us going forward? And there's really no one better to help us think through that than Carol Spahn. Carol, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Great to have you with us. You've experienced Peace Corps from multiple vantage points as a volunteer in Romania, as a country director in Malawi, and most recently as director of the agency, where you led the agency through its global restart following COVID and helped reorient the agency for a new moment. And you found time also to spend decades working across regions and sectors in international development. A whole lot. I'd love to start with your journey. Looking back across that arc, how has your understanding of the Peace Corps mission evolved, and how did that experience shape your decision about what to do next, including your transition to the University of Denver?
Well, thank you so much for having me to NPCA. Thanks for hosting Helen and Steph. Thanks for joining us. It's just such a wonderful community to be a part of, both in Peace Corps and here in Denver. I started my Peace Corps career as a small business development volunteer in Romania. And it wasn't necessarily your typical volunteer service. It was about 4 years after the fall of communism. I had to have my mom send my business suits because I was working at a small business development center that was sponsored by the UNDP. But what I learned during that period, and part of my motivation to go, was it was this really important time in the world after the wall fell and the world was opening up in a different way. And I thought, this is a moment where I really want to be a part of something bigger than myself. And we're living through those moments right now. We lived through it during COVID. We've lived through it as some of these geopolitical shifts are happening. We're living through it with AI. I will say that the internet started during my service. I had email for the first time, right? Which feels shocking. It wasn't that long ago, but it was 32 years ago. So how will we look back at this moment, right, 30 years from now, and how did we show up in that moment is something I think about a lot. But as a volunteer, you're in it, in the everyday and struggling through the frustrations, the joys, the challenges, the learning. And it was just such a transformational time for me, as I'm sure it is for, every volunteer I've ever spoken to. And then I, many, many years later, came back as a country director. And I had the privilege of seeing behind the curtain and what happens as countries welcome us in, as communities welcome us in. And the story I remember the most is going out with one of our program managers fairly early in my tenure to do one of the pre-site development visits. and 11 chiefs showed up. 11 chiefs to hear about Peace Corps, to hear what would happen. And I thought, boy, if I, as a volunteer, knew that that's what happened before I came, I would be so intimidated and also feel so welcomed, right? But just knowing those expectations and knowing that a community cared enough to show up and invite me in is such a gift. So I started to think about that service as this network, this global enterprise where we're saying we are going to open our hearts and homes to you, and you are going to come in with an open heart. And that just made me think about service as so much bigger than just one volunteer in one community, right? It's just this entire group of people who care enough to show up in that way, and that ethos and that value system. And I also had the privilege of meeting with ministers and other government officials and learning a little bit about what it meant for them to have volunteers as well, because they invite us in and they help us prioritize. And we go through a very diligent process to figure out what it is we're going to do and how does that align with their needs and interests. And then you flash forward to director, and that was just the privilege of a lifetime, truly to put it all in this historical context. And there were times when we were looking for quotes and looking for information to bring up to the Hill. And I got to read some of the letters that heads of state sent inviting Peace Corps volunteers, saying, we want your energy, your enthusiasm, right? So it wasn't necessarily about the skills, right? In some cases it was. And in some cases it was, this is a pivotal moment for our country. And if the president of Benin said, we will take 500 of your generalists. We love that spark that they bring. And that was incredibly powerful. So you put it in this lens of history and see why it's important for someone to drive around their country and find an American working in a village, speaking their language and drawing water from the borehole. It's truly heartwarming. And just want to share all of that love out with all of you. I felt very privileged to receive it on my many trips. And it really did cement just the importance of how we show up.
I absolutely love the story about the Chiefs. And I'm wondering, because you and your career really are an inspiration for so many people that want to serve, that think about serving, that are serving, that want to find new ways to serve. I'm wondering, what would you have said to younger you going into service, not knowing the Chiefs are lining up, they're getting ready for me? What would you say to younger you right at the moment you're boarding the plane, getting ready to start your 2-year service?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I would say, just know how much the people you're about to live with for 2 years have invested in you being there and how much they care. Because it can feel very lonely when you're out there and you might not know exactly what went on. And you think you're this lone actor, and really there is this entire community just ready to embrace you and to lean into that and allow it to happen. I'm a fairly type A person. I'm there to get the job done. And one of my favorite moments in Malawi was with our education director, Michael Kumwenda. And one of our volunteers was really distraught that, she really just wasn't making progress with her head teacher. And his advice stuck with me, and I've repeated this story, so forgive me if anyone on this call has heard it before. But he told the volunteer, I want you to go to your head teacher's house and have tea every Sunday and call me in a month. And that was it, right? It's about connection. You have to slow down and allow that connection to happen, to really be in community with people and build that trust.
That is terrific. And I think something that I know you've said to me a lot, I've heard you say it in a number of public fora, it's about the relationships. So fundamental to service in general, right? including Peace Corps. I want to ask you about this really hard period of time where you were leading the agency. It was real disruption, change like the world hadn't seen before with COVID. And I'm wondering, what's something you came to understand differently about service or leadership um, through that time? Something that you really weren't expecting. Certainly
Mm.
COVID, I imagine you weren't expecting, but what did you learn, about service or leadership that you really weren't expecting before this?
Well, I think we all learned a lot during COVID, and some of it we didn't want to learn, but we did, and it was amazing to see how people rallied. We evacuated almost 7,000 volunteers in 9 days across 64 countries. People spread out all across those countries. And in fact, the former director, Jody Olson, wrote a paper about this, talking about the importance of those decades-long partnerships and how that really people rallied around our volunteers to get them out safely at a time when borders were closing. And, we often had 48 hours before the border would close, and they would open the airways for us and host us in different ways, support. Ethiopian Airlines sent larger planes. I mean, it was really just this all-out effort. And I think when you show up with humility, when you show that you care, right, people can come together in really profound ways. And it happened again when we deployed volunteers domestically for only the second time in our agency's service. That's a very complicated enterprise to do that. People just, were on fire, so mission driven. And I think that speaks to the spirit of the entire RPCV community as they rallied around each other during COVID, those evacuated volunteers as they showed up for domestic service. And then as we stood up virtual service, which was unprecedented as well. And that was on the request of the government of Botswana. And that really took off to a place where we had volunteers providing trauma-informed teaching, training to teachers in bunkers in Ukraine. Like, just stories that you can't believe how resilient people can be during really tough times. And it was just a really proud moment, I think, for the Peace Corps.
What what facilitates or what enables the pivot? I mean, these were significant shifts. You really were shifting the whole, the whole ship. So I'm wondering what facilitated that? What enabled that to be possible?
Well, I think Peace Corps staff, Peace Corps counterparts, returned volunteers are very creative people. And that's what we do in communities. We do it in our work. So I think just unleashing that creativity. And it happened in every corner of the agency. Our Office of OSLD, I'm forgetting what that stands for, Learning and Development, stood up a course for people to learn how to do hybrid teaching and training. They taught 800 of our staff, and we had staff around the world mentoring staff at headquarters. And then our team in Macedonia took it out and trained all of the teachers in Macedonia on how to do hybrid and other course development. That's beautiful. Nobody could orchestrate that from headquarters, from a top-down approach. You just have to really lean into what people, are motivated. They see the opportunity. They're closest to the challenge, and they're going to pick it up and run with it.
What you're saying really reminds me of the importance of listening to the communities that you place us in and trusting that they know what they need, they know what they want, and they're looking for you to be with them side by side to help them achieve it. Um, in a moment where there's so much changing around us, particularly about how people engage globally, what feels essential about the experience of service today, and why does it still matter? Why does service still matter?
There's so much. I could talk about this all day, but I'll try to keep it short. what I'm seeing is that service in the 2026 Year of the Volunteer UN report, and that tracks both formal and informal service. But there's really this look at service as a means of social cohesion and trust and building connection. And how do we make volunteering and Peace Corps volunteers had the benefit of this immersive experience with a lot of training and a lot of support. But some other service models are moving towards shorter, assignments, sort of in and out, sort of go in for a day. So corporate volunteerism in particular is up significantly, the number of volunteers, the number of hours they're putting in, but they're saying that the depth of that service is going down. And so there's a real call to make it personal in real life, that the service itself matters, like the impact of the service, but the impact of the connection matters even more right now. Last year, the WHO came out with a report on social isolation and loneliness. This followed the US Surgeon General's report and call as well. And he's got a book out that's terrific, really saying that social health is at the same level as our mental health and our physical health. So think about that for a minute. They said this crisis of social isolation and loneliness, where 1 in 6 people globally, this is not just the US, globally, is lonely, has the health impact of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Right? So this is a profound shift that we're seeing as a result of technology coming out of COVID, lots of different factors impacting this. And I personally think it's a root cause of a lot of the polarization and other lack of civic engagement that we are seeing across the board. So when you boil it down, service is taking on this elevated role if we do it well and if we're intentional about that. And I want to give a shout out to the team at Peace Corps who designed the virtual service program, because they said, if we're going to do this, it's not just going to be about the technical skills. We want to build in the other 2 goals and make sure that we are sharing cultures, make sure that we are taking the time to connect with people, even in those virtual experiences. So it can be done with a virtual experience, and the importance of that in real life, service is just, I think, critically important right now.
That is so powerful to really reflect on the importance of our social health and the role of volunteerism in it. I'm also curious about volunteerism and its role in social cohesion. Could you say more about maybe how you've seen it function, or even a Peace Corps story, perhaps, where you've seen the impact of volunteerism in supporting the social cohesion of a community or a country?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Peace Corps volunteers are taught those skills, right? Very intentionally taught bridge building skills. And they bring those skills with them back to the United States, and that curiosity and that interest in learning about others and building those relationships and building community. And, Robert Putnam has a great book called Bowling Alone, where he talks about the decline of people joining organizations. And there's a Netflix documentary, in case anyone is interested, called Join or Die. And that's pretty stark, term. I would maybe reframe it in a positive Peace Corps way, like join and thrive. But really just saying, joining, being a part of a community, which is something that volunteers learn and do in and of itself. And it doesn't have to be specifically to overcome difference. It could be joining a running club or a church or a card group or whatever it is. But that act of showing up week after week in community with people, particularly those who are different than ourselves, then we have those trust reserves, right? We know people as humans, we can engage with them in a different way. And, we have a crisis of trust as well in this country. There's an Edelman report that came out that talks about decline in trust. Trust is at one of the lowest levels it's ever been historically. A couple of years ago, it was a crisis of polarization. Last year, they described it as a crisis of grievance. This year, they described it as a crisis of insularity. So we are increasingly trusting those in smaller and smaller circles. And so that role of a community connector is also increasingly important. So how can those people at the micro community level where trust is most likely to, live and breathe, sort of start to build out that circle of trust and rebuild where we are as a country. It has to happen in the Peace Corps way, sort of one relationship at a time. We know how to do that.
I have to say that does give hope. And also something I appreciate about what you're saying is that these skills are skills that can be taught, can be learned, can be grown, and are the very ones that could help us in reducing, mitigating social cohesion or improving social cohesion and reducing insularity and the things that you're mentioning that really are pulling us apart rather than bringing us together. I want to pivot us a little bit to look ahead. What do you hope for the future of Peace Corps and international service? And what do you think will need to evolve to get there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there will always be a really important role for international service, and that is in all directions. And people just going into a community, and I will say not even necessarily international service, even domestic service, going into a community that is different than your own, where you can shift perspective. So I would love to see that ecosystem evolve and grow and figure out how to create more opportunities. I'm part of a working group that is looking at that and looking at that at the university level, at the government level. Can we get additional options for service credits at universities? Can we expand scholarships at the state level? Both Colorado and Maryland have laws that give returned Peace Corps volunteers in-state tuition. That should be every state. That should be expanded to some of the AmeriCorps and Teach for America programs, right? Like if we really elevate service and that culture, that's what I would hope to see. I'm also really excited about how service opportunities are evolving overseas. So we had a partnership with Core Africa, and they started in Malawi and Senegal, and it was initially Morocco. So they were starting up when I was there as a country director, started by a returned Peace Corps volunteer, Liz Fanning. And she was approached by a host country national who said, I want to serve in the Peace Corps. And she had to say, I'm sorry, you can't. It's only for Americans. And so she started an organization where she made that opportunity available. And they are celebrating 15 years this year. And I want to share this statistic with you because it just really blew my mind. So they were in 3 countries for a while, got some funding from MasterCard Foundation, expanded to 11 countries. This year, they had over 25,000 applications for 650 slots. These are college-educated young people from that country who want to serve in rural communities like Peace Corps volunteers. They serve for a year. They learned human-centered design and asset-based community development. And that's just such a beautiful opportunity. So I hope that that expands for young people in all around the world and that our Peace Corps volunteers are able to work directly with them. I think it would be a really powerful experience. And we had some programs that were piloting that.
Wow, what an incredible partnership that would be. Thank you for sharing those examples. I want to reserve enough time for the questions, which are rolling in. Thank you, everybody, for that. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A function. I'll use them to guide us through the next 30 or so minutes of our time together. Carol, I first want to thank you so much for the thoughtful and grounding conversation, and now get you ready for all the questions that are coming in. Steph, you too, because I'm seeing a bunch directed at you. So I'm going to start that just now. All right. So first question, Carol, to you. What operational goals would you like to see Peace Corps aspire to in the next 2 to 5 years to be recognized as an effective contributor to global peace?
Well, that's an easy question. Who
Great
wrote
one.
that? Look, I think we need to mobilize more people. And recruiting post-COVID was very challenging. I think there were a lot of things that contributed to that. As I understand, interest is really increasing right now. And how do we inspire people of all ages to get out there and be a part of the world right now? I think it's so important that we, in our role as, public ambassadors, as in public diplomacy, people to people diplomacy, whatever you want to call it, like there's a very important role for us to show up overseas and show who we are. And I know that the team at Peace Corps is doing a great job, and they have a very ambitious goal to get to 8,000 volunteers. And so I hope all of us who are on this call who served already are really motivated to get out and share your story and inspire the next generation and support that goal.
I wonder if I could build on this question to ask you about the connection you see between Peace Corps volunteers, what Peace Corps volunteers do in service, and peace building.
Yeah. I was asked that by a reporter when I first got to Romania. And he said, "Come on, you think that this is, building world peace and friendship?" It's like, well, how else does it start if it doesn't start sort of one relationship at a time? And going back to your earlier question, I was able to see that in very real ways, both in terms of stories where there was a former Peace Corps volunteer at the negotiating table with someone from a ministry, someone who was working for State Department, right? And negotiating with someone who had been taught by a volunteer on the other side, right? And there's immediate trust, and that's priceless. The former PEPFAR ambassador, so in charge of all of the global health security programs as well, his role was elevated. Dr. John Nkengasong was taught by a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon. And he tells the story of sitting in the back of the classroom and, being a back of the classroom kind of guy. And Peace Corps volunteer came and he was like, wow, this is interesting, a different way of thinking. Let me sit up front. And both he and his wife were taught by returned Peace Corps volunteers. Like that's the spark that creates that different way of thinking. And to get to world peace and friendship, we have to understand each other.
You mentioned earlier the piece around curiosity, and I love that. And I think for myself, and I've heard it a million times from returned Peace Corps volunteers, it's the curiosity, ask the question and show interest, and really starts the conversation and starts to build that trust.
Mm-hmm.
Steph, I've got a question for you. Does this program accept transfer students?
Sure. So the University of Denver has undergraduate programs, of which Korbel also has two. So for transfer student, meaning you're a current undergrad enrolled in a different undergraduate institution, yes, we love transfer students and we offer a very generous scholarship. So I'm happy to I'll put my information in the chat and I'll connect you to our undergraduate admissions office who handles that. And we have two undergrad degree programs, international studies and public policy, that I think speaks to the curiosity element we were just talking about, and leadership. It's a great preparation for a variety of cross-functional degrees, whether you want to go to graduate school or you want to start in the career force, or excuse me, in the career field. There's lots of opportunities here at the University of Denver.
Great. Our next question, Carol, to you. Who decides what the qualifications are for a Peace Corps volunteer position? I'm not sure here. I think they're talking, yeah, Peace Corps volunteer, maybe a field position, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Yeah, those are negotiated between our staff and the government. And we try to be, again, very intentional about what are they asking for. So in some countries, the governments have very strict requirements. And, some countries only want, for example, certified teachers or people with master's degrees in their schools. And like I said, others are saying, give us 500 of your generalists. So it really depends on what the government is asking for. And I think that's such a core part of how we work, that we really do try to respect that. And, where there are positions that maybe could be a little more flexible, try to negotiate that with them. But they really are in the driver's seat.
I love that about Peace Corps, and was staff in the field as director of programming and training at a few different posts, and remember quite clearly asking the government, what do you need? And then looking and seeing, okay, who can we recruit? And then the training piece, what additional training could we provide to these folks to make sure we're being responsive to what our host government has asked for, what they really need. So a really nice way that Peace Corps shows it can be responsive to what we're asking to do and how we can show up in a way that is a true partnership. All right. Carol, another question for you. How many countries have PCVs right now? And how many PCVs total? We're quizzing you on Peace Corps here.
Well, I'm not entirely sure. I believe we're in 61 or around that number, and around 3,200 volunteers. And some of the NPCA staff may know the exact numbers. And while I'm here, I did see someone in the chat who was one of my volunteers in Malawi. Hi, Susan. Great. So glad you could be here.
Another question we've got here. Okay, what's the balance between the number of applicants for the Peace Corps and the budget for them? The current budget seems to be frozen. How many new volunteers can the current budget handle? Tricky question for us there.
Yeah, I think there's always a question of, what actually drives the cost of the Peace Corps. And I really worked hard to build understanding that the true cost is the cost of having a country operation, is that infrastructure of recruiting volunteers, clearing them, serving them medically, and then the staff that are on the ground in a given country. So the incremental cost of a volunteer at post is not what drives the budget. It's all of those other factors. And so those are the things that the team at Peace Corps, I'm sure they're crunching the numbers and trying to figure out how to maximize to get to the number of volunteers that they're hoping to bring in.
All right. Steph, what is it about Peace Corps volunteers that the school finds appealing?
Their service. I mean, they're coming to a graduate education with life experience, stories to tell, and a clear vision for what their future looks like. That is prime for graduate school, allowing you to engage with your fellow students of different viewpoints, genders, backgrounds, name all the things. So that Korbel can be a real place of real dialogue. So we don't come at things with a specific point of view. We want to hear all the point of views. We like to see a tagline here in Denver, as you can see far from here, meaning in our mountains, we're 280 feet up, but also that students, their stories, their experiences are what drive the classroom experience in a meaningful way. So we love volunteers. They're really integral. And I believe, actually, Carol might be able to quote me on this. For several years, the University of Denver has been one of the highest admission rates for return volunteers. And Korbel, by proportion, also has those. So several, I think they list by big school, middle-sized school, and smaller school, and we're always on that list.
Yeah, I think it's in the historic numbers, and this is of volunteers who are people who are sent into service. It's one of the highest producing for the medium range. So I think that conveys a lot of the values and why I was interested in being in an institution like DU. It really feels like home here. And, just a lot of people who care about public service and really value that input. And then, also there's a Coverdell program and, from an admission standpoint, really prioritize people with that lived experience.
Steph, let me ask you another question that we're getting from the audience. What do you feel really sets Korbel apart from other graduate programs?
There's three things. The people, including Carol and our faculty. A lot of schools will say, we have the best faculty, and they do. I mean, every school has wonderful faculty, but our faculty, we're hiking together, we're working together in the classrooms. It's a really small environment. So that relationship building element that you learn and develop in the Peace Corps transitions here. So we're not a big giant school, like say a state school, I won't name any, but we're not super small where it's just a boutique. So you get that real happy medium. So that brings me to my second point, which is career opportunities and outcomes, whatever that looks like for you. Is it continuing education or entering the job market? Being in Denver allows you to have access to a local government, a city government, and military installations. And Denver is one of the highest concentrations of nonprofits in the country. So Peace Corps volunteers that are looking to expand that element are really well positioned here, where sometimes in other, let's say East Coast side of those big cities, everyone is vying for those opportunities. So our students are they're not the ones that are working and getting coffee. They're the ones doing the research project or leading the team and leveraging their experience. And the last thing I'll say is academic quality. We are 12th ranked, of the only ranking of our kind by Foreign Policy. I'm sure many of you Peace Corps volunteers read that and get those magazines to your homes, but the academic rigor here is second to none, and our competitors are the Ivies. So academic rigor, the transformative, personalized, meaningful experience, and the career opportunities.
Great, thank you. A question either of you might answer. Are there skills and experience from grad school, maybe from Korbel, that would be really helpful for new volunteers?
My gosh, I think faculty should answer that too, but I'll say leveraging that experience and learning how to translate it to a career, right? Those things that can be really hard. How do you take, Carol, for example, what you did in Milan while you were country director, but how do you take that and or Romania, excuse me, and move that into pivoting to working for a private sector or the public sector? What does that translation look like? And we'll give you the theoretical foundation, but also the skills. So skills you need to get that first job, whatever that might look like for you. But I'd love to hear from a faculty perspective what they might think.
Yeah, it's interesting right now, this balance between sort of hard skills and soft skills. And the World Economic Forum came out with a report that looks at, they have it every year, the Future of Jobs report. And one of the fastest growing skill sets is, of course, like AI and big data. But the highest sought after skills are things like adaptability, analytic options, creative problem solving, teamwork, communications, all of these soft skills that volunteers learn during service. And, again, it's like, how do you translate that into an organization or into, the workforce? But these are highly sought after skills. So both from the volunteer side, how does the university value them and how will they really set you apart as you move forward in your career, especially at this time of big data. And it's the counterpoint to it, right? The more and more technology we have, the more we need to embrace our humanity. And navigating that space is what I'm seeing in almost every report and every study. And I think, again, back to the loneliness, I think we haven't got that right yet. And that's where I think Peace Corps volunteers and their skills are just second to none.
Carol, there's a question about your Peace Corps service and what was one of the most challenging moments that you had? And then a follow-on question to that, what has been one of the most rewarding experiences since your Peace Corps service?
Great questions. I think one of the most challenging things of being, in Eastern Europe following the fall of communism and being there so quickly afterwards was there was still a lot of mistrust, and people weren't quite sure why we were there. And so I found a lot of projects being, shut down or stopped, or I taught a course on business ethics at the university, and then they didn't want me back the next term, and I didn't understand why. And, it turned out that there were some people asking questions, right? And so that was really hard, especially because, you come with such an open heart to have that intent, somehow questioned or not understood was very, very challenging. And I think very different from some other people's experience, even other volunteers, who were serving in Romania. That wasn't something that everybody experienced. And so, you just have to keep putting yourself out there and finding what works, which all volunteers have to do in one way or another. And that just happened to be, one of the more challenging things from my service is how do you build trust, and especially around intent of why you're there. And, I made some amazing friends and, had a wonderful counterpart, very dynamic woman who really pulled me in and explained why things happened the way they did. And everybody needs that too, right? Some kind of cultural interpreter so that you're not, wondering if it was something you did wrong, and how to move past it. I think since then I've just been blessed to have so many beautiful experiences that really knocked me on my socks, right? That really just, you have these profound moments, and they're such a gift when you see the connection between a volunteer and their counterpart. There was a volunteer in South Africa who was doing and she did our storytelling series at the Kennedy Center as well. And she did these things with her students, and they all sort of sang a song, and they went like this, and then they kissed their brain. And it was just lovely, like just that little gesture, that little routine, and they did it every morning before they started class. Right? Those are the precious moments that really mean the most, and it's why we do what we do.
What a great story. I'm sure there are lots of volunteers who are in the audience now and thinking of that story, one that is meaningful to them too. I know that we all have them, and they stay with us. They really, really do. Let's see. I've got another question here. This is a tough one. With strife and conflict in the U.S. and globally, what role can Peace Corps truly serve? How does it help give us hope for our own country?
That's not even a hard question. That is the easiest question that we've had today, because you just have to show up and put that positivity, put the love out there into the world. And one of my favorite new terms that I learned since coming to Colorado was from a rafting guide. And, when you're rafting, they say in their sort of preemptive safety talk, okay, if you fall out of the boat, we want you to point positive. I was like, wait, what's that? And they said, well, don't look at the rocks around you. Look where you want to go. Right? So I think of that metaphor of, as we're navigating these waters, there are rocks all around. We need to know where they are. Can't be naive, but we have to chart a path through them that speaks to what we as individuals can do in a way that brings some positivity into the world. And if we can all find that space, and I know so many people are overwhelmed, there's so much happening, there's so much change. I'm actually teaching a class on leadership in uncertain times and talking about how you work with a workforce and how you lead when people are just maxed out, not necessarily even from the work, but from all of the change that's happening around them. And that's my key message is find your path. And then, some of the noise will slip away because it's too big. And then we freeze. We get overwhelmed and we freeze. So whatever it is you can do tomorrow to step out into the world in a different way, do it and focus on that one thing day after day.
I love that. Easy step. Show up, point positive. That's terrific. One more question we have for you both. What is the outlook for employment in international relations in the next 5 years? And what areas will be most in demand?
I'll start with that one. That I think is the hardest question
Yeah.
because it is being disrupted. Everything that we have known from the US federal government's role in our world that has changed, to how we're responding has changed, and to the skills that we need to respond are changing. So I'll answer this question is that the problems aren't gone. The problems still exist. It's the creativity in how we solve them. And I'm not sure what that looks like. I think in some ways it's going to be really transformative and beautiful. I do think there is going to be a short-term period, particularly where young people are going to struggle to get government roles in, say, the foreign service, or, I'll say USAID was a large employer. Those problems don't mean that they don't exist, but they're going to be solved differently in the future. And I think I'd like to think it's going to be more of if any of you are Ezra Klein readers or podcast listeners, he wrote a book called Abundance. And I think I'd like to think of our future that way. We have a lot of young people that are eager, that have grown up in times of polarization and violence here in the United States and globally, but they are incredibly passionate about solving that. And I'm really excited about how we might do that. It won't mean that there won't be this short-term period where it will be discomforting, but I think out of that, we'll see some growth. But I don't have a magic 8 ball as much as I wish that I did, to say exactly how they'll manifest, but we will be entrepreneurial and we will grow and we will continue to solve problems that impact our world locally and globally. Carol, do you?
Steph, I couldn't have said that any better. That was beautiful. And I would echo all of that. And the real question is, what do we do in the meantime? And that's when, you've got to pivot and look at what skills you're going to get out there and bring, whether it's a private sector skill or, working for local or state government where there are, very big challenges as well. Whether it's, rural community development or something else, and then look at how you can translate those skills internationally. Many of you know this, but I started my career as an accountant and a financial statement auditor with KPMG Pete Barwick, right? Like you can start in lots of different places. And that skill has served me in every single role I've ever had, right? So, just look at how you round out your skill set, and, then come back in with that creativity and those ideas, because as Steph said, those problems are not going away.
Great advice. I want to give both of you the opportunity to give one more piece of advice if you've got something you want to share. What would you say to the person thinking about going into service? Could be Peace Corps service or another form of service. Or what would you say to the person thinking about going back to school and potentially coming to University of Denver?
Well, I can start with that one. On the service part, just do it. Don't overthink it. It is the most transformational thing you can ever do, and you will never regret it, whether it's a year or 2 years, whether it's in the US or overseas. Just get out there and be a part of the community in real life where you're stretching your skills, you're getting outside your comfort zone, and be a part of the change you want to see, right? We have some agency here. And I feel like, this sense of there's all this stuff happening outside of myself that I can't control. We can't control all those things, but there's a lot of stuff we can. So get out there and be a part of it. And, like I said, DU is just an amazing place to be as you think about what you want to do and how you want to skill up.
Yeah, I'll start with where you ended. Think about what you want to do and how you can diversify your skill set if you have different backgrounds and experiences and undergraduate degrees. As we move into an AI-driven world, you will need more human skills, right? And what does that look like? And I think a degree in this time, particularly if you're a young person entering the market, getting a degree now will serve you both financially, but in the long term, because the federal service is retiring, there will be a different and new administration. There are significant global humanitarian challenges that need staffing. So if you're inspired for service in that way, now is actually a great time to go to graduate school where there's lots of scholarship and opportunity. So I would echo everything that Carol just mentioned. Thank you.
All right. Well, Carol, thank you for your leadership, for your reflections, and for helping us think more clearly about what service means in this moment. And Stephanie, thank you as well for sharing how the Korbel School is preparing the next generation to step into this work. Thank you to all of you who joined us this evening and brought your thoughtful questions. I'll come back to where we started with this idea of service as a North Star. Because while the world around us is changing, that sense of direction, that commitment to connection, to partnership, to showing up with humility and purpose continues to matter. And if anything, it may matter even more now. Thank you all for being a part of this conversation. Point positive. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.